Woman insults Elon Musk over a t-shirt, then learns who he really is. The bustling streets of downtown were alive with energy. People moved through the chaos of honking cars, street vendors shouting about their wares, and tourists snapping photos of graffiti-covered walls. Among the crowd, a young woman, dressed in a bold blue shirt with the words, "Elon Musk is a dick" emblazoned across it, walked confidently with a slight smirk on her face. She had caught the attention of passers-by. Some chuckled, others looked away awkwardly, but the woman didn't care. Her steps were purposeful, her chin held high, and her eyes gleamed with defiance. As she walked past a group of bystanders, one man whispered, "Do you think she knows Musk is in town today?" The comment barely registered with her. She wasn't there to cater to anyone else's opinions. The shirt wasn't just a piece of clothing to her. It was a statement, one she believed in fully. She turned a corner and found herself in front of a street mural. Ironically, the mural featured Elon Musk's face, painted with exaggerated detail, his eyes gazing upward as if he were a visionary looking into the future. Next to the mural, a local artist had spray-painted the words, "Dream bigger." The woman scoffed loudly, drawing the attention of a small crowd near her. "Dream bigger," she said with mockery, gesturing to the mural. "More like exploit bigger." Some people chuckled nervously, while others turned away, unwilling to engage. But her voice carried, loud enough to catch the attention of a man standing a few feet behind her. He was dressed casually, dark jeans, a fitted jacket, and a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. At first glance, he looked like any other urban passerby. Except he wasn't. The man paused, his gaze fixed on the woman as she continued her one-sided tirade. He tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable, and crossed his arms. But he didn't say a word, at least not yet. "People worship billionaires like him," the woman continued, oblivious to her growing audience. "Like he's some kind of savior. Give me a break. He's just another rich guy exploiting workers and playing with toys." A few people murmured among themselves, their eyes darting between her and the man standing silently behind her. Some of them had recognized him, though he seemed to prefer staying unnoticed for now. He adjusted his cap slightly, his face still shadowed but unmistakable to those paying attention. The woman turned to face the mural again, pulling her phone from her pocket to snap a picture. "Perfect," she muttered. "This'll make for a great post." Irony at its finest. The man finally stepped forward, his movement catching her peripheral vision. She turned, locking eyes with him for the first time. "Nice shirt," he said, his tone casual but carrying a weight that made her pause. "Do you wear it often, or just for special occasions?" The woman blinked, momentarily taken aback by his presence. She noticed the way he stood, his posture relaxed yet confident, and the hint of a knowing smirk on his face. Something about him seemed familiar, though she couldn't quite place it. "And you are?" she asked, her tone sharp, masking her sudden discomfort. "Just someone who finds your shirt." "Interesting," the man replied, his voice calm and even. "Mind if I ask why you chose it?" The woman squared her shoulders, regaining her composure. "Because it's true," she said firmly. "Elon Musk is a fraud. A billionaire who hoards wealth and pretends to care about humanity while stepping on the little guy. Someone has to call him out." The man raised an eyebrow, his smirk widening slightly. "That's a pretty bold statement," he said. "Do you always believe everything you read? Or do you do your own research?" Her eyes narrowed. "I don't need to research to know the truth," she shot back. "It's obvious. Look at the working conditions in his factories. Look at how he treats people. All the flashy PR stunts can't cover up the exploitation." The man nodded slowly, as if considering her words. "I see," he said. "And you think wearing that shirt is going to make a difference?" "It's about raising awareness," she said, her voice growing louder. A few people in the crowd leaned in closer, sensing the tension. "People need to know the truth. If it makes even one person think twice before worshiping him, then it's worth it." The man's smirk faded slightly, replaced by an expression that was harder to read. He tilted his head, his gaze steady. "And what would you say?" he began, his tone measured. If I told you that you might not have the whole story? The woman crossed her arms, her stance defiant. I'd say you sound like one of his fanboys. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd, but the man didn't react. Instead, he reached up and removed his cap, revealing his face fully. The crowd gasped audibly, their murmurs turning into a low buzz of recognition. The woman's eyes widened slightly, her confidence faltering for just a moment before she masked it with a forced laugh. "Oh, great," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "The man himself. What? Did you come to defend your honor?" Elon Musk, now fully revealed, smiled faintly, his demeanor calm and unbothered. "Something like that," he said. "But I'd rather have a conversation than a defense." The crowd grew silent, their anticipation palpable. The woman, now keenly aware of the growing audience, straightened her posture, refusing to back down. "Well," she said, gesturing to her shirt, "you've got my attention. Let's hear it." Elon's gaze remained steady, his calm presence a stark contrast to the escalating tension in the air. "All right," he said, his voice even. "Let's talk." The crowd around them began to grow as word spread that Elon Musk was standing in the middle of a public square, facing off with a woman boldly wearing a shirt that openly insulted him. Passers-by stopped to see what the commotion was about, their curiosity piqued by the unusual spectacle. Whispers rippled through the crowd, some people fumbling for their phones to record the moment. The woman, emboldened by the growing audience, smirked. She leaned slightly closer to Elon, as if daring him to engage further. "So, Mr. Billionaire," she said, her voice laced with mockery, "what's your big comeback? Are you going to whip out some stats to prove you're a saint? Or maybe show us all how many Teslas you've sold, as if that fixes the world?" Elon, standing as steady as a statue, studied her with a quiet intensity. His silence, far from showing weakness, only seemed to amplify his presence. But to the woman, it was an invitation to push harder. "You're not used to this, are you?" she continued, her voice growing louder. "You're used to people fawning over you, treating you like some kind of tech god. I mean, look at all of them," she said, gesturing to the crowd. "They're hanging on your every move, like you're about to drop some profound wisdom. Newsflash. You're just another rich guy who got lucky." Elon raised an eyebrow, his lips curving slightly into a faint smile. "Got lucky?" he repeated, his tone mild. "Interesting take. Go on." The woman bristled at his calm response, clearly expecting more of a reaction. "You think all this," she waved her hand, encompassing the crowd, the mural, the city around them, "makes you important? You're just another billionaire throwing money at problems so people think you're a genius. But what about the people you step on to get there? The workers in your factories? The communities you disrupt with your so-called innovations?" The crowd murmured, a mix of agreement and discomfort. A few people nodded, clearly resonating with her words, while others seemed to grow uneasy with her increasingly confrontational tone. "Let me guess," the woman continued, turning to the crowd now as if rallying them to her side. "You all think he's some kind of hero, right? Because he builds electric cars and shoots rockets into space? But how many of you know what goes on behind the scenes? How many of you know about the lawsuits from former employees? The stories of people being overworked and underpaid while he rakes in billions?" Elon's smile faded slightly, though his calm demeanor remained. "You're clearly passionate," he said, his tone measured. "And you've clearly done some research. But tell me, do you always paint people in black and white?" She snorted, folding her arms across her chest. "Nice deflection. That's classic PR training right there. Never address the criticism head-on, just shift the focus. I guess that's what makes you so good at selling yourself." The crowd watched intently, their eyes darting between the two. Some looked to Elon, waiting for him to deliver a sharp retort, while others seemed captivated by the woman's audacity. One man in the crowd, a middle-aged onlooker with a phone clutched tightly in his hand, muttered, "She's really going for it. Huh? I can't believe she's talking to him like that." Another woman beside him whispered, "It's bold. I'll give her that. But it's Elon Musk. Does she even realize who she's messing with?" The woman, hearing some of the murmurs, turned back to Elon with a triumphant smirk. "You see that," she said, gesturing to the crowd. "People are starting to wake up. They're starting to see through the facade. Maybe it's time you came down from your pedestal." Elon tilted his head slightly, his gaze unwavering. "And what would you suggest I do?" he asked, his tone genuinely curious. "Abandon everything I've built? Stop working on the projects I believe in? Or would you prefer I just disappear?" The woman faltered for a moment, clearly not expecting the question. But she recovered quickly, her defiance undeterred. "I'd prefer you start holding yourself accountable," she snapped. "You talk about changing the world, but all you're doing is making it easier for the rich to get richer. Where's the accountability for the people you leave behind?" The crowd murmured again, their reactions divided. Some nodded in agreement, while others frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the hostility. A young man in the back called out, "Hey, at least he's trying to do something. What have you done?" The woman turned sharply, her eyes narrowing as she searched the crowd for the voice. "What have I done?" she echoed, her voice rising. "I speak out. I don't stay silent while people like him trample over everyone else. That's more than most people can say." Elon took a step forward, his movement subtle but enough to draw the crowd's attention back to him. "It's easy to criticize," he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge. "It's much harder to create. Have you ever built something from nothing? Have you ever taken the risks that come with trying to change the world?" Her jaw tightened, the confidence in her posture faltering just slightly, but she quickly masked it with a scoff. "Oh, please, spare me the self-made billionaire narrative. You had resources most people could only dream of. Don't act like you started from the bottom." Elon's eyes narrowed slightly, the first real crack in his calm exterior. "I didn't start at the bottom," he acknowledged, "but I did take risks that could have left me with nothing. And if I'd failed, people like you wouldn't even remember my name." "You think that excuses everything?" she said, her voice sharp. "You think success justifies exploitation? That because you've taken risks, you get a free pass to do whatever you want?" Elon didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glanced at the crowd, his gaze sweeping over the faces watching him. "Success doesn't justify anything," he said finally. "But failure doesn't solve anything either. If you think I've made mistakes, fine. I'm not perfect, but at least I'm trying. Can you say the same?" The crowd fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. The woman opened her mouth to respond, but for the first time, she hesitated. The confrontation had shifted, the balance of power tilting ever so slightly. But the tension was far from over. The crowd buzzed as the woman folded her arms tighter, the edges of her confidence sharpening like a blade. For her, this was more than a moment. It was a stand against everything she believed Elon Musk represented. And she wasn't going to let him, or the growing crowd, deter her. "You're trying, huh?" she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "That's your defense? You're trying? Funny how trying for you looks like building a playground for billionaires while the rest of us are left cleaning up the mess." Elon, still composed, glanced at her shirt and then back at her face. "It's easy to judge from the sidelines," he said, his tone firm but still calm. "But the people who make the loudest noise are rarely the ones actually doing the work." The woman's jaw tightened, her cheeks flushing with anger. "Don't patronize me," she snapped, stepping closer to him. "You don't know anything about me or the work I've done. Just because I'm not launching rockets or driving around in electric cars doesn't mean I'm not trying to make a difference." "Then tell me," Elon said, tilting his head slightly, "what are you doing to make a difference? Because shouting at a mural and wearing that shirt, it's not exactly groundbreaking." A ripple of laughter ran through the crowd, and the woman's face darkened. She turned to the crowd, her hands gesturing wildly. "You see this?" she exclaimed, her voice rising. "This is what billionaires do. They turn it around on you. They make you the problem, like somehow it's your fault for calling them out." Several heads nodded in agreement, and a few people clapped. Others, however, shifted uncomfortably, unsure where to place their loyalty. Elon, unfazed, stood his ground, letting her words hang in the air for a moment before responding. "Calling people out is easy," he said, his voice carrying above the crowd's murmurs. "It doesn't take much to criticize. But building something real, something that changes lives, that's hard. And it's messy. Mistakes happen. People get hurt. But you don't change the world by standing still. Is that your excuse?" She shot back, her tone growing sharper. "That mistakes happen? How convenient. I bet the workers in your factories find that real comforting when they're pulling 16-hour shifts or losing their jobs because of automation." "Oh, it's okay. Guys." Elon says mistakes happen. The crowd buzzed louder now, some people whispering among themselves while others openly nodded in agreement. A middle-aged man near the front muttered, "She's not wrong, though. There've been stories." Another voice chimed in, "Yeah, but he's also pushing us forward. What's she done except yell?" The woman's ears caught the murmurs, and her eyes flared. She pointed a finger at Elon, stepping even closer. "You don't care about people," she accused. "You care about your image. Everything you do is about making yourself look like a hero. The electric cars, the rockets, even that stupid tunnel project, it's all for show. A way to stroke your ego while the rest of us scrape by." Elon's expression hardened slightly, the faintest hint of irritation flickering in his eyes. But his voice remained steady. "If all I cared about was my image," he said, "I wouldn't be standing here right now, talking to you." She scoffed, throwing her arms in the air. "Oh, please, this is just another PR stunt for you, isn't it? Show up, play the humble genius, and walk away looking like a saint. Well, guess what? I'm not buying it. And I'm sure as hell not afraid of you." The crowd gasped slightly at her boldness, and a young man in the back muttered, "She's really going for it." Elon's smirk returned, subtle but unmistakable. "Afraid of me?" he repeated, his tone almost amused. "Why would you be afraid of someone who's just a rich guy who got lucky?" The woman opened her mouth to respond but faltered for a split second, realizing he had flipped her own words back on her. She quickly recovered, her voice rising. "Because people like you think you can buy your way out of accountability. You use your money and your power to silence people, to bury the truth. But not this time. Not with me." Elon took a small step forward, closing the distance between them. His calm demeanor was beginning to take on an edge of quiet intensity. "And what truth is that?" he asked, his voice low but steady. "That I'm human? That I make mistakes? Or is it just easier to paint me as a villain because it fits your narrative?" Her confidence wavered for a split second, but she quickly masked it with a glare. "You don't get to play the victim here," she said, her voice shaking slightly with emotion. "Not when you've got millions of people worshiping you, defending you, like you can do no wrong. Meanwhile, the rest of us are stuck cleaning up after the mess billionaires like you make." Elon tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. "You talk a lot about US and them," he said, "but you're standing here, in a crowd, shouting at a mural and wearing a shirt with my name on it. You've made me the center of your message. So tell me, what exactly are you fighting for?" The question hung in the air, and for the first time, the woman hesitated. She glanced at the crowd, as if searching for support, but the mixed reactions on their faces offered little reassurance. Her bravado faltered, but only for a moment. "I'm fighting for the people you forget," she said, her voice quieter but still defiant. "The ones who don't have a voice. The ones who can't stand up to you because they're too busy trying to survive." Elon nodded slightly, as if acknowledging her point, but his next words cut through the tension like a blade. "And yet, here you are, fighting for them by shouting at me. Do you really think that changes anything?" The crowd fell silent, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone present. The woman's face flushed, a mix of anger and frustration boiling beneath the surface. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Elon didn't press further. Instead, he stepped back slightly, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "I'm not perfect," he said, addressing them now, "and I've never claimed to be. But progress doesn't come from perfection. It comes from trying, failing, and trying again. The air grew heavier as the tension between the woman and Elon Musk deepened, drawing the crowd closer, almost magnetically. Every word she spoke felt like a jab, each one more pointed than the last. And yet, Elon's calm, unshakable demeanor made her escalation feel like throwing stones at a mountain. She couldn't stop now, not when her frustration was boiling over. Turning her back slightly to Elon, she addressed the growing audience, her voice louder and more charged. "Do you hear this?" she said, gesturing toward him with both hands. "This is what people like him do. They deflect, distract, and act like they're above it all. Meanwhile, the damage they cause piles up, and who's left to deal with it? People like you and me." Elon stood still, watching her intently. His lack of visible emotion only seemed to aggravate her further. "It's easy to be calm and collected when you're worth hundreds of billions," she sneered, spinning back toward him. "When was the last time you worried about paying rent? Huh? Or wondered if you'd have enough for groceries that week?" There was a murmur of agreement from a few people in the crowd, emboldening her. "You sit in your ivory tower," she continued, "while the rest of us scrape by. And you have the audacity to tell us you're trying? Please." Elon's eyes narrowed slightly, his expression unreadable. He took a small step forward, and the subtle movement caused the crowd to quiet down. "You're angry," he said simply, "and I get that, but yelling at me isn't going to fix anything. What exactly do you want?" The question, posed so directly, caught her off guard for a moment. But she quickly recovered, straightening her posture and glaring at him. "I want accountability," she said sharply. "I want you to stop pretending you're some kind of savior and own up to the damage you've done." Elon tilted his head, his expression still calm but now tinged with a hint of curiosity. "What damage?" he asked, his tone measured. "Be specific." She clenched her fists, her frustration bubbling over. "Oh, don't play dumb," she snapped. "The factories where people work themselves to the bone for barely livable wages. The communities you displace with your so-called innovations. The environmental damage you ignore while you play with rockets. Need me to go on?" Elon remained silent for a moment, as if considering her words carefully. Then he said, "I've made mistakes. I won't deny that. But I've also created thousands of jobs, developed sustainable energy solutions, and pushed the boundaries of what's possible. Are those efforts meaningless to you?" "They're not meaningless," she shot back, "but they don't erase the harm you've caused. You can't just throw money at a few charities and call it even." The crowd buzzed again, divided in their reactions. Some nodded in agreement, while others whispered among themselves, their expressions ranging from skeptical to outright defensive. A man near the back of the crowd called out, "At least he's doing something. What are you doing, except complaining?" The woman spun toward the voice, her eyes blazing. "I'm doing what most people are too scared to do," she retorted. "I'm speaking up. I'm calling out people like him who think they can get away with anything because they have money and power." The man scoffed. "Yeah, real brave, yelling at a mural and a guy who's actually trying to make the world better." The crowd's murmurs grew louder, and the woman's face flushed with anger. She turned back to Elon, her voice rising. "This isn't about me," she snapped. "It's about you and the harm you've done. You sit there with your billions, playing God, while people like us clean up the mess." Elon's expression remained calm, but his voice carried a sharper edge now. "You keep saying people like us," he said, "but you're not speaking for them. You're speaking for yourself. And if you're so sure I'm the problem, then tell me, what would you do differently?" The question landed like a hammer, silencing the crowd. The woman blinked, caught off guard for the first time. She began, but her words faltered. She quickly recovered, though her voice hardening. "That's not the point. The point is that you've built an empire on the backs of others, and you need to be held accountable." Elon's gaze didn't waver. "And accountability in your mind looks like what? Public humiliation? Me disappearing? What exactly do you think solves the problems you're so angry about?" Her frustration boiled over, and she took a step closer to him, jabbing a finger in his direction. "Stop pretending like you care about solutions," she hissed. "All you care about is your image. This whole conversation is just another opportunity for you to look good. Elon leaned slightly forward, his voice dropping to a quieter, more intense tone. You're wrong, he said. This isn't about image. It's about ideas that move the world forward. You don't have to like me, and you don't have to agree with me. But if all you're doing is tearing people down, you're not solving anything. You're just adding to the noise. The crowd buzzed again, and the woman's face twisted in anger. Noise, she repeated, her voice rising. You think my voice is noise? That's exactly the problem with people like you. You dismiss anyone who challenges you, anyone who doesn't fall in line with your vision. Elon didn't flinch. I don't dismiss challenges, he said evenly. I welcome them, but challenges are supposed to make things better, not tear them apart. So again, I'll ask you, what would you do differently? The woman's face flushed, and for a brief moment, the crowd could see her hesitation. Her defiance was still there, but cracks were beginning to show in her composure. She glanced around at the crowd, searching for support, but the mixed reactions on their faces offered little reassurance. She began again, but her voice wavered. She quickly straightened her posture, forcing herself to appear confident. I'd start by actually listening to the people you claim to help. Elon nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. And do you think yelling at me in the middle of a street is the best way to get me to listen? The question hung in the air, and the woman's mouth opened and closed, no immediate response coming to her. The tension between them was palpable, the crowd holding their breath as they watched the confrontation unfold. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, tension mounting as the confrontation reached new heights. The woman, now visibly flustered, glanced around at the growing group of onlookers. She wasn't used to being challenged like this, especially not by the man her shirt so boldly insulted. But she wasn't about to back down. If anything, her desperation to maintain control of the narrative only fueled her anger. You think this is funny, don't you? She spat, narrowing her eyes at Elon. You stand there with your calm, smug attitude like you've got it all figured out. But you're nothing without the people who actually do the work. Your empire, built on their backs. And yet here you are, acting like you're the savior of humanity. Elon didn't flinch, his calm gaze unwavering. I never said I was a savior, he replied. That's your interpretation. Oh, don't give me that, she snapped, her voice rising. Every interview, every press release, every tweet. It's all about how you're going to save the planet or revolutionize space travel. You love the spotlight, you thrive on it, and the second someone questions you, you turn it around on them. The crowd stirred, some nodding in agreement while others exchanged uncertain glances. A middle-aged man near the front spoke up. But he's not wrong, is he? I mean, he has done a lot, electric cars, reusable rockets. Yeah, and at what cost? The woman interrupted, her voice sharp. She turned to face the man, her hands gesturing wildly. Do you know how many lawsuits his companies have faced? How many workers have come forward with stories of exploitation, unsafe conditions, and impossible demands? Or do you just choose to ignore that because it doesn't fit the shiny, perfect image he sells? The man frowned but didn't respond, clearly unsure how to counter her points. Sensing an opportunity, the woman turned back to Elon, her expression triumphant. See? Even your fans can't defend you when they're faced with the truth. Elon raised an eyebrow, his calm demeanor finally showing a faint crack of irritation. You're painting a very black and white picture, he said, his tone measured but firm. The world doesn't work that way. Progress isn't clean or perfect. Mistakes happen. But if you think tearing people down is the solution, you're not helping anyone. Oh, here we go again, she sneered. The classic billionaire excuse. Mistakes happen. How convenient for you. Do you ever take responsibility for anything? Or is it always someone else's fault? I take responsibility for my actions, Elon replied, his voice steady. But responsibility isn't the same as perfection. And it certainly isn't the same as letting anger dictate your actions. Her face flushed red, and she clenched her fists at her sides. Don't you dare lecture me about anger, she hissed. You have no idea what it's like to be on the other side of this. To work yourself to the bone and still struggle to make ends meet while people like you sit on piles of money." The crowd murmured again, a few people nodding while others looked uncomfortable. A young woman near the back spoke up timidly. "But isn't he trying to help? With the sustainable energy and everything?" "Help?" The antagonist scoffed, spinning toward the voice. "You call selling overpriced electric cars helping? You think launching rockets that only the rich can afford to use is somehow making the world better? He's not helping. He's cashing in on the planet's problems." The young woman shrank back, her cheeks flushing, and the antagonist turned back to Elon with a smirk. "See? Even your supporters can't defend you without sounding ridiculous." Elon remained silent for a moment, his gaze steady. Then he spoke, his voice calm but with an edge of steel. "You talk a lot about what I'm not doing," he said, "but I don't see you offering any solutions. What exactly are you doing to make the world better?" She froze for a split second, her confidence faltering before she quickly recovered. "I'm doing what most people are too scared to do," she said, her voice rising. "I'm holding you accountable. I'm calling out the hypocrisy of people like you, who think they can throw money at problems and call it a day. And what does that accomplish?" Elon asked, his tone sharp. "What changes because you yelled at me in the middle of a crowd? Do you think your anger fixes anything?" Her face twisted with frustration, and she stepped closer to him, her voice trembling with emotion. "You don't get it, do you? People like you never do. You think because you've done some good, it cancels out all the harm. But it doesn't. It never will." Elon didn't respond immediately, his gaze locked on hers. The crowd watched in tense silence, their attention riveted on the confrontation. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but firm. "No one's perfect," he said. "Not me, not you. But progress doesn't come from tearing each other down. It comes from building something better." "Oh, spare me the motivational speech," she snapped, rolling her eyes. "You don't care about progress. You care about your image. And right now, I'm ruining it for you, aren't I?" Elon's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "You're not ruining anything," he said. "You're just making noise." The words hit like a slap, and the crowd gasped. The woman's face flushed with anger, and she took another step forward, her voice shaking with fury. "Noise?" she repeated, her tone venomous. "That's all you think this is? That's all you think I am?" She turned to the crowd, her arms outstretched. "Do you hear that? That's how billionaires see us. As noise. As insignificant distractions. Well, I'm not going to be silenced. Not by him and not by anyone." The crowd murmured again, divided in their reactions. Some nodded in agreement, their expressions angry and defiant. Others looked uncertain, their loyalty to Elon wavering under the weight of her accusations. Elon remained silent, his gaze steady and unflinching. He didn't need to say anything. His presence alone was enough to command the crowd's attention. The woman, realizing she wasn't getting the reaction she wanted, doubled down, her voice growing louder and more desperate. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she shouted, pointing at him. "People like him think they're untouchable. They think they can do whatever they want and we'll just take it. Well, not anymore. Not today. You think you're clever, don't you?" she hissed, jabbing a finger toward Elon. "Trying to turn this around on me like I'm the problem. Classic billionaire tactic. Make the little guy look crazy while you walk away unscathed." Elon's calm remained unshaken, but there was an unmistakable shift in his demeanor now. His eyes, sharp and calculating, locked onto hers with an intensity that made the crowd instinctively lean in closer. "I'm not turning anything around," he said, his voice even. "I'm asking you to take responsibility for your own words. You've spent this entire time tearing me down. Fine, but what exactly are you building?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. The woman opened her mouth, ready to fire back another retort, but the growing crowd around them had become an entity of its own, their whispers and pointed looks adding weight to Elon's challenge. Her confidence wavered, just for a moment, but she quickly masked it with a sneer. "Don't try to twist this," she snapped, her voice rising again. You're the one who needs to take responsibility. You act like you're changing the world, but all you're doing is making things worse for the rest of us. Elon tilted his head slightly, a faint smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. You keep saying, the rest of us, he said, his tone measured. But who are you really speaking for? Because right now, it feels like this is less about us and more about you. Her face flushed, the subtle jab landing harder than she expected. She took a step forward, her finger still pointed accusingly at him. Don't you dare try to psychoanalyze me, she said, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. You have no idea what it's like to be me, to struggle the way I do. Elon's smirk faded, replaced by an expression of quiet intensity. You're right, he said. I don't know what it's like to be you, but I do know what it's like to fight for something you believe in, even when the odds are against you. She scoffed loudly, throwing her hands in the air. Oh, please spare me your inspirational speech. You don't know anything about fighting. You've had everything handed to you, money, power, connections. The only thing you've ever fought for is your ego. The crowd shifted uneasily, some murmuring in agreement, while others exchanged skeptical glances. A middle-aged man near the front of the crowd muttered, "That's not entirely true. He's taken risks, right?" Another voice chimed in, louder this time. "Yeah, but she's got a point. He's still a billionaire. How hard can his life really be?" The woman, emboldened by the scattered support, turned back to Elon with renewed fire in her eyes. "See? Even your own supporters can't defend you. Deep down, they know I'm right. They know you're just another rich guy who got lucky." Elon let out a quiet breath, his gaze steady. "Luck has nothing to do with it," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "And if you think my life has been easy, you haven't been paying attention." "Oh, here we go," she said mockingly. The poor billionaire sob story. "Let me guess, your life was so hard, but you pulled yourself up by your bootstraps, right? Save it. Nobody here is buying it." Elon's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something resolute and unyielding. He took a step closer to her, his voice low but firm. "You think you know me?" he asked, his words laced with quiet intensity. "You think you know what I've been through, what I've sacrificed, what I've lost? You don't. All you see is the end result, not the journey it took to get here." The crowd fell silent, the weight of his words cutting through the tension like a knife. The woman's confidence faltered again, but she quickly masked it with a defiant glare. "Don't try to make this about you," she said, her voice quieter now but no less sharp. "This isn't about your struggles. It's about the harm you've caused." "And what about the harm you're causing right now?" Elon shot back, his voice rising slightly. "You stand here, shouting accusations and tearing me down in front of a crowd. But what are you actually accomplishing? Do you think this helps anyone? Do you think this changes anything?" The question hit her like a slap, and for a moment, she had no response. The crowd buzzed with whispers, their opinions divided and their loyalties uncertain. The balance of power in the confrontation had shifted, and everyone could feel it. "You don't get it," she said finally, her voice shaking with frustration. "This isn't about accomplishing anything. It's about calling out people like you who think they're above accountability." Elon nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. "And you think wearing a t-shirt and shouting in the street is holding me accountable?" he asked, his tone sharp. "If you really cared about change, you'd be doing something constructive, not just making noise." Her face flushed red, and she clenched her fists at her sides. "You're just trying to shut me up," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "But I'm not going anywhere. I won't let you walk away from this." "I'm not walking away," Elon said firmly. "I'm standing here, listening to you. But if all you're doing is tearing me down, you're not holding me accountable. You're just feeding your own anger." The crowd murmured again, their reactions mixed. Some nodded in agreement with Elon, while others shook their heads, siding with the woman. The tension was at its breaking point, and everyone could feel the confrontation nearing its climax. The woman, now visibly flustered, turned to the crowd, her voice rising. "Do you hear this? This is what billionaires do. They deflect, they distract, and they act like they're the victims. Don't fall for it. But her words, once sharp and commanding, now felt hollow, her confidence crumbling under the weight of Elon's unyielding calm. The cracks in her armor were showing, and the crowd could see it. Elon, sensing the shift, stepped forward again, his voice steady and resolute. "You're angry," he said, "and I get that, but anger without action doesn't change anything. If you really want to make a difference, stop shouting and start building." The woman's bravado had cracked, but her defiance lingered, flickering like a dying flame. She scanned the crowd for support, her eyes darting nervously between the faces of strangers. Where there had once been murmurs of agreement, she now saw skepticism and doubt. Even the few who had nodded along earlier seemed hesitant to voice their support now. Elon stepped forward, his calm yet commanding presence pulling all attention back to him. His voice was low, deliberate, yet it carried a weight that silenced even the faintest whisper in the crowd. "You've made this about me," he said, his gaze locking onto hers. "About my money, my choices, my mistakes. But this was never about me, was it? It's about something bigger. Something you're not willing to face." Her lips parted as if to respond, but no words came. The crowd shifted uneasily, the weight of Elon's words pressing down on everyone. The silence was deafening, and in it, her uncertainty became palpable. Elon didn't wait for her to recover. He continued, his tone unyielding but not unkind. "You're angry, and I understand that, but anger alone doesn't build solutions. It burns bridges. It alienates people who might have stood with you, and it blinds you to the truth." "What truth?" she snapped, her voice sharp but trembling. "That you're just another billionaire who thinks he's above criticism? Save it. The truth," Elon said, stepping even closer, "is that your anger isn't about me. It's about you, about feeling powerless, about not knowing how to fix what's broken. And instead of confronting that, you've chosen to lash out, because it's easier to tear someone else down than to face your own fears." The crowd let out a collective murmur, the weight of Elon's words cutting through the tension. The woman's face flushed deep red, her defiance faltering as his words hit closer to home than she was willing to admit. "That's not true," she said, her voice quieter now. "You don't know anything about me." "You're right," Elon said, his tone softening slightly. "I don't know your story, but I can see the pain in your eyes. And I know what it feels like to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. The difference is, I chose to channel that weight into action. Not anger." Her jaw tightened, but her silence spoke volumes. The crowd watched intently, their collective gaze bouncing between Elon and the woman, waiting to see how the confrontation would unfold. One man from the crowd finally spoke up, his voice breaking the silence. "He's got a point," he said. "Yelling doesn't fix anything. If you want change, you've got to work for it." The woman spun around to face the man, her eyes blazing. "Don't lecture me," she snapped. "You have no idea what I've been through." "And neither do we," Elon interjected, his voice steady but firm. "Because instead of telling us your story, you've spent this entire time trying to tear me down. If you want people to listen, you have to give them a reason to care." Her fists clenched at her sides, her composure slipping further. "Why should I have to explain myself?" she demanded, her voice rising again. "Why do I have to justify my anger to you, of all people?" "Because you chose to make this about me," Elon said simply. "You made me the target of your anger. And now you're upset that I'm asking questions you don't want to answer." The crowd buzzed again, their murmurs growing louder. The woman's chest heaved with frustration, her eyes darting around as though searching for an escape route. But there was none. Not from the scrutiny of the crowd, and not from the truth in Elon's words. "You're just twisting things around," she said finally, her voice trembling. "You're trying to make me look like the bad guy." "I don't need to make you look like anything," Elon replied. "Your actions speak for themselves. And right now, they're telling the world that you're more interested in tearing people down than lifting them up." The crowd murmured in agreement, the tide turning firmly in Elon's favor. The woman's shoulders slumped slightly, the weight of her own actions bearing down on her. But even in her humiliation, she refused to admit defeat. "You think you're so clever," she muttered, her voice barely audible. "But you're just like every other billionaire. Out of touch and full of yourself." Elon tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "If that's what you believe, then you're free to walk away," he said. "But if you really want to make a difference, you'll stop hiding behind your anger and start looking for real solutions." She froze, the option to leave hanging in the air like a lifeline. But leaving would mean admitting that she had lost the confrontation, and her pride wouldn't let her take that step. Instead, she crossed her arms tightly over her chest, her gaze fixed firmly on the ground. The silence that followed was deafening, the crowd holding their breath as they waited for her next move. But none came. Her anger, once so sharp and all-consuming, had finally burned itself out. Elon turned to the crowd, his voice carrying a note of finality. "We all have the power to make the world better," he said. "But it starts with taking responsibility for our actions, no matter who we are." The crowd erupted into applause, the tension that had gripped them finally breaking. The woman stood frozen, her face pale and her shoulders hunched, as the reality of her defeat sank in. Elon didn't gloat, didn't rub salt in the wound. Instead, he turned back to her, his voice quiet but firm. "The world doesn't change because of anger," he said. "It changes because of action. And that starts with you." With that, he stepped away, the crowd parting to let him through. The woman stood there, alone and silent, her humiliation complete. The lesson was clear, and it was one she wouldn't forget anytime soon. As the crowd dispersed, the echoes of Elon Musk's final words lingered in the air, hanging like a reminder of the lesson everyone had just witnessed. The woman stood rooted in place, her arms still tightly crossed, her gaze fixed on the ground. She had started this day with the intention of calling out what she perceived as injustice. But now, her anger felt hollow, her confidence shaken. Elon walked a short distance away, but he didn't leave the scene entirely. He spoke briefly with a young man in the crowd, who nodded eagerly before jogging toward the woman. The man handed her a small slip of paper and whispered something before stepping back. "What's this?" she asked, her voice quieter than it had been all afternoon. "An opportunity," the man replied, glancing toward Elon, who was now calmly speaking with a few other onlookers. "Mr. Musk told me to give it to you. He said if you're serious about making a difference, this might help." She unfolded the paper and stared at it, her brow furrowing in confusion. It wasn't a business card or a dismissive platitude. It was a list of organizations dedicated to community support, activism, and change, some of them even known for holding corporations accountable. At the bottom, in neat handwriting, was a note. "Anger can start a fire, but only action can keep it burning for good." For the first time all day, she felt her anger give way to something else. Confusion, curiosity, and maybe, just maybe, the faintest glimmer of humility. What just happened here today is more than a confrontation. It's a lesson in how we approach conflict, responsibility, and the challenges of creating real change. Elon Musk didn't back down from criticism, but he also didn't let the conversation spiral into meaningless anger. He stood his ground, asked tough questions, and reminded everyone that change doesn't come from tearing others down. It comes from building something better. And that's where the lesson lies, not just for the woman in the story, but for all of us watching. How often do we let our emotions guide our actions without stopping to ask ourselves, what am I really trying to accomplish? It's easy to point fingers, to blame others for what's wrong in the world. But the harder and far more impactful path is to take that energy and channel it into action. This isn't about agreeing with everything Elon Musk stands for. It's about recognizing the power of accountability, both in others and in ourselves. The woman started the day with anger, but by the end, she was left with a choice: to continue shouting into the void or to take the first step toward meaningful change. Which path would you choose? Now, let's turn it over to you. What would you have done in this situation? Would you have approached it differently? Do you think the woman was justified in her anger? Or do you think Elon handled the situation in the best way possible? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear from you. And if this story resonated with you, take a moment to think about the lessons it offers. Whether you're facing challenges in your own life or standing up for what you believe in, remember that anger can light a spark, but only action can fuel a fire for change. Let's not just talk about making the world better. Let's take the steps to make it happen. If you enjoyed this story and the message behind it, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who could use some inspiration, and subscribe for more thought-provoking stories like this one. Together, we can create a ripple effect of positivity, one small step at a time. And as always, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.